He prosecuted the man who tried to murder him. Then he moved into his house. What happened next shocked everyone who knew them. David Chun was everything you'd expect from a successful criminal prosecutor. At 35, he stood tall in his perfectly tailored suits, his black hair always impeccably styled, his briefcase worth more than most people's monthly salary. He had built his reputation on being ruthless in the courtroom, never losing a case that mattered. His downtown penthouse overlooked the city he had sworn to protect, its floor-to-ceiling windows reflecting a man who had everything: success, respect, and the satisfaction of putting dangerous criminals behind bars. David lived for justice, or at least his version of it. Marcus Rodriguez was David's complete opposite. At 42, he was a broken man whose life had crumbled piece by piece. Once a respected construction foreman, Marcus had lost everything when a workplace accident left him with chronic pain and an addiction to prescription medications. His wife had left, taking their 2 children. His house had been foreclosed on. His friends had abandoned him. Now, he lived in a rundown apartment in the worst part of town, his hands shaking from withdrawal, his eyes hollow with the kind of desperation that makes men do terrible things. Where David saw the world in black and white, Marcus lived in an endless gray of pain and regret. The night that changed everything started like any other for David. He was walking to his car after working late, prosecuting a drug trafficking case that would put several dealers away for decades. The parking garage was dimly lit, his footsteps echoing off the concrete walls. He never saw Marcus coming. The attack was brutal and desperate. Marcus, high on a cocktail of stolen pills and liquid courage, had waited in the shadows with a knife. His plan was simple in its desperation: rob the fancy lawyer, get enough money for his next fix, disappear into the night. But when David fought back, when he looked Marcus in the eyes and refused a hand over his wallet, something snapped. "You people," Marcus had snarled, pressing the blade against David's throat. "You sit in your ivory towers judging the rest of us. You have no idea what it's like to lose everything." The struggle was brief but vicious. Marcus stabbed David twice in the chest before a security guard's flashlight spooked him into running. David collapsed in a pool of his own blood, his phone just out of reach, his vision fading as sirens wailed in the distance. He survived barely. 3 weeks in the hospital, 2 surgeries, and a scar that would never fully fade. When Marcus was caught 2 days later, trying to pawn David's stolen watch, the case seemed straightforward: attempted murder, armed robbery, assault with a deadly weapon. David would prosecute himself. It was personal now. But something strange happened during the months leading up to the trial. As David recovered, he found himself obsessed not with revenge, but with understanding. He read Marcus's file obsessively: the work injury, the medical bills, the foreclosure, the divorce papers, the descent into addiction. He visited the construction site where Marcus had fallen, talked to former co-workers who described a man who had once been kind, reliable, someone who never missed his daughter's soccer games. He wasn't always like this, Marcus's former supervisor had told David. The accident broke more than just his back. It broke his spirit. David began visiting Marcus in jail, ostensibly to prepare for the prosecution. But their conversations grew longer, deeper. Marcus was suspicious at first, thinking it was a trap, some prosecutorial mind game. But David's questions weren't about the attack. They were about Marcus's life, his pain, his children he hadn't seen in 2 years. "Why do you care?" Marcus finally asked during one of their meetings, his voice hoarse from months of poor prison food and sleepless nights. "Because," David said quietly, "I need to understand what drove you to that parking garage." Not for the case, for me. Marcus began to open up despite himself. He talked about the phantom pain that never left his back, about watching his family slip away while he spiraled into addiction, about the night he attacked David, when he had been 3 days without pills and desperate enough to do anything. He cried when he talked about his children, 8-year-old Sophia and 10-year-old Diego, who thought their father was a monster. David found himself listening not as a prosecutor, but as a human being. He saw the man Marcus had been before the accident, before the pills, before the desperation, and slowly, impossibly, something shifted between them. The turning point came 3 weeks before the trial. David was reviewing medical records when he discovered something that changed everything. Marcus's workplace accident had been caused by faulty equipment that the construction company had known was dangerous. The same company that had denied Marcus's workers' compensation claim, forcing him into bankruptcy when he couldn't work. David sat in his office that night, the revelation hitting him like a physical blow. Marcus hadn't just been abandoned by the system. He had been failed by it, crushed by the very institutions David had spent his career defending. The man who had tried to kill him was as much a victim as a perpetrator. But the real shock came when David investigated further. The construction company's lawyer, the one who had fought Marcus's compensation claim with ruthless efficiency, destroying his case with technicalities and delays, had been David himself. 3 years earlier, before he had switched to criminal prosecution, David had been the corporate lawyer who had helped deny Marcus the help he desperately needed. David stared at the old case files with his own signature, his own legal arguments that had left Marcus with nothing. He had forgotten the case entirely. It had been just another day at the office, another victory for his corporate clients. But for Marcus, it had been the beginning of the end. The irony was devastating. David had helped create the circumstances that led to his own attempted murder. David couldn't sleep for days after the discovery. His colleagues noticed his distraction, his sudden reluctance to discuss the upcoming trial. His assistant asked if he wanted to recuse himself from the case. Let another prosecutor handle it. No, David said quietly. This is something I need to finish. The trial proceeded, but David's heart wasn't in it. His opening statement was perfunctory. His cross-examination on Marcus gentle to the point where the judge asked if he was feeling well. Marcus's public defender, expecting a vicious prosecution, was bewildered by David's restrained approach. On the final day, David did something unprecedented. Instead of asking for the maximum sentence, he stood before the judge and spoke not as a prosecutor, but as a man seeking to right a terrible wrong. "Your Honor," David began, his voice steady despite the trembling in his hands, "I stand before you today not just as a victim of this crime, but as someone who has come to understand the complex circumstances that led to it. I request that this court consider not just punishment, but the possibility of redemption." The courtroom was silent. Marcus stared at David in shock. Even the judge seemed taken aback. David continued, "I believe in justice, Your Honor, but I also believe in the power of human beings to change, to heal, to become better than their worst moments. And I believe that sometimes justice looks different than we expect." Marcus was sentenced to 3 years with the possibility of parole in 18 months, contingent on completing addiction treatment and community service. It was far less than anyone had expected. But David's real shock came 18 months later. Marcus was released on parole, clean for the first time in years, having completed every program the court required. He had no place to go. His family was still estranged, his old apartment long gone to someone else. That's when David made the decision that baffled everyone who knew him. He owned a small house across town, a property he had inherited from his grandmother and never sold. Instead of putting it on the market, he offered it to Marcus, not as charity, but as a chance for a fresh start. "Why?" Marcus asked when David handed him the keys, tears streaming down both their faces. "Because," David said, "I helped put you in that parking garage, Marcus. Not intentionally, but my actions years ago contributed to your pain. This isn't about forgiveness. It's about responsibility. And maybe it's about friendship." Marcus moved into the house, got a job at a rehabilitation center helping other addicts, and slowly began rebuilding his life. His children, now 11 and 13, started visiting on weekends. His ex-wife, seeing the change in him, agreed to family counseling. David and Marcus met for coffee every Sunday morning, an unlikely friendship forged from tragedy and understanding. David had changed too. He left criminal prosecution to become a public defender, fighting for people like Marcus instead of against them. 6 months after Marcus moved into the house, David's colleagues still whispered about his decision. They called it everything from admirable to insane. But David knew the truth. Sometimes the most radical act of justice is not punishment, but the courage to break the cycle that creates criminals in the first place. True justice isn't about revenge. It's about understanding that we're all capable of both terrible mistakes and incredible redemption. Sometimes the person who needs saving most is the one holding the knife, and sometimes the person who can save them is the one they tried to hurt. The house still stands today, a testament to the idea that some wounds can only heal when we choose to bridge the gap between victim and perpetrator, between judgment and compassion. If you like that story, please subscribe for more. Thank you, and until next time.